Maya Chun saw pure terror flooding an elderly woman's eyes while every other person in the restaurant saw nothing wrong, and she called 911 knowing it could cost her everything. The next morning, one of the most powerful CEOs in America walked through the door looking for her, and the words he spoke would shatter her ordinary life into 1,000 pieces. "You saved my mother." Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the weight of entire worlds. A glance held too long, a trembling hand that doesn't quite reach the water glass, a smile that never makes it to the eyes. For Maya Chun, a 26-year-old waitress at the upscale Belmont restaurant, reading people wasn't just a skill, it was survival. 6 years of serving the city's elite had taught her that beneath the designer clothes and polished manners, everyone had a story, and some of those stories were written in the language of fear. The Thursday evening shift started like any other. The Belmont sat on the corner of 5th and Madison, a place where reservations were made months in advance and where a single entree cost more than Maya made in an entire shift. The dining room was a study in understated elegance with cream-colored walls, soft amber lighting that made everyone look 10 years younger, and tables spaced far enough apart that conversations remained private. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling like frozen fireworks, and the silverware was heavy enough to feel substantial in the hand, a small psychological trick that justified the astronomical prices. Maya had been working since 3 in the afternoon, helping with prep and covering the early dinner crowd. Her feet ached in her regulation black flats, and her lower back had that familiar tight sensation that came from hours of moving between kitchen and dining room. She'd tied her dark hair back in a neat bun, and her white blouse was still crisp despite the heat of the kitchen. The black vest with the Belmont's discreet gold logo sat perfectly against her frame. She looked professional, composed, exactly what the restaurant's wealthy clientele expected. The dinner rush was in full swing. Maya moved through her section with practiced efficiency, her smile warm but not overfamiliar, her service attentive but never intrusive. Table 7 wanted their steaks rare, not medium rare, and she'd already sent them back once. Table 9 was celebrating an anniversary, their second bottle of champagne already empty. Table 12 had a regular customer, Mr. Hartfield, who always ordered the duck and always complained about the preparation, though he came back every week without fail. At 7:30, the hostess, a young woman named Claire with perfect posture and a voice like honey, approached Maya near the service station. "We have a walk-in for your section," she said quietly, her professional smile firmly in place. "Table 4, just one guest. Elderly woman. She seems a bit confused. Couldn't quite remember if she had a reservation, but we have the space, so Marcus approved it." Maya glanced toward table 4, a small two-top near the window with a view of the street below. It was a good table, one usually reserved for regulars or special requests. She nodded to Claire and picked up a menu and a water glass, smoothing down her vest as she approached. The woman sitting at table 4 looked to be in her late 70s, perhaps early 80s. She wore a beautiful turquoise cashmere sweater that looked expensive and well-maintained, and her white hair was styled in an elegant bob. Pearl earrings caught the light, and her hands, resting on the white tablecloth, bore several rings that spoke of a lifetime of good taste and old money. She should have looked perfectly at home in the Belmont's refined atmosphere, but something was wrong. Maya had learned to trust her instincts, that subtle radar that picked up on things others missed. As she approached the table, she noticed the way the woman's hands trembled slightly, not the natural shake of age, but something more urgent, more distressed. Her eyes, a pale blue that might once have been striking, darted around the room with a kind of desperate confusion. She was searching for something or someone, and the searching had an edge of panic to it. "Good evening," Maya said, her voice gentle as she set down the menu and poured water into the crystal glass. "Welcome to the Belmont. My name is Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The woman's gaze snapped to Maya's face, and for a moment there was a flash of relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Yes," the woman said, her voice cultured but strained. "Yes, I would like." She paused, and her expression clouded over. "What was I saying? Perhaps some water to start," Maya suggested, keeping her tone light and reassuring. "And I can tell you about our specials this evening." The woman nodded, but her attention had already drifted away. She picked up the menu with hands that shook, stared at it for a moment, and then set it down again as if it were written in a foreign language. Her breathing was shallow, quick, and Maya noticed a fine sheen of perspiration on her forehead despite the comfortable temperature of the dining room. "Are you meeting someone here this evening?" Maya asked carefully, pulling out her small notepad but not yet writing anything down. The woman looked up at her, and in her eyes Maya saw something that made her stomach tighten. It was terror, pure and undiluted, the kind of fear that came from being lost in a world that had suddenly stopped making sense. "I think," the woman began, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I think I'm supposed to meet my son. But I can't." She pressed her lips together and tears began to well in her eyes. "I can't remember where I am." Maya felt her professional composure waver. This wasn't just an elderly woman having a difficult evening. This was someone in genuine distress. She glanced around the dining room. The other tables were occupied with their own concern, conversations flowing around her like water around a stone. The kitchen staff was busy with orders, and the other waitstaff were managing their own sections. No one else had noticed. "You're at the Belmont restaurant," Maya said gently, setting down her notepad and taking a small step closer. "On 5th Avenue. Do you remember how you got here?" The woman's face crumpled and she shook her head. No, I don't. I was in the car and then I was walking and now." She looked around the room again, her panic rising. "I don't know where I am. I need to find Richard. My son's waiting for me, but I don't know where." Maya's training kicked in. She dealt with difficult customers, drunk customers, even belligerent customers, but this was different. This woman wasn't being difficult. She was frightened and disoriented, and every instinct Maya had was screaming that something was seriously wrong. "Let me help you," Maya said, her voice calm and soothing. "Why don't you sit here for a moment, and I'm going to see if I can reach your son for you. Do you have a phone with you? Maybe his number's in your phone." The woman reached into her purse, a beautiful leather bag that matched her elegant appearance, and pulled out a smartphone. She stared at it as if it were an alien artifact, turning it over in her hands. "I don't know how to use this," she said, her voice breaking. I used to know everything." "It's all right," Maya assured her. "Let me see if I can help." She reached out and the woman handed her the phone. Maya unlocked it, there was no password, and pulled up the contacts list. There were dozens of numbers, but no clear indication of which one belonged to the woman's son. She scrolled through looking for anything that said son or Richard, but found nothing obvious. The woman was becoming more agitated. She twisted her hands together and her breathing had become even more rapid. "I need to go," she said suddenly, half rising from her chair. "I need to find him. He's waiting. He'll be worried." "Please," Maya said, gently touching the woman's arm. "Please sit down for just a moment. I promise I'm going to help you, but I need you to stay here where it's safe." The word safe seemed to break through some of the confusion. The woman sank back into her chair, but her eyes remained wide and frightened. Maya's mind raced. This wasn't just confusion. The trembling, the sweating, the rapid breathing, the profound disorientation, these were symptoms of something serious. A medical emergency, perhaps a stroke or a severe panic attack or something neurological. Whatever it was, the woman needed help. Real help. Not just a kind word and a glass of water. Maya made a decision. She signaled to Claire at the hostess stand, catching her eye and making a small gesture that indicated she needed assistance. Then she turned back to the woman. "I'm going to make a phone call," she said, "to get some help. You're going to be just fine, I promise. What's your name?" The woman blinked, and for a moment the confusion cleared slightly. "Eleanor," she said. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore." "Eleanor," Maya repeated. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Maya, and I'm going to make sure you're taken care of." Claire appeared at her elbow, her professional demeanor faltering slightly as she took in the scene. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly. "No," Maya said, her voice low but firm. "I think this woman is having a medical emergency. I'm calling 911. Claire's eyes widened. "Are you sure? I mean, maybe she's just confused. You know how some of our older guests can be." Maya looked at Eleanor, at the fear in her eyes, at the way her hands trembled against the tablecloth, at the shallow, rapid breathing that suggested her body was in distress. She thought about all the times she'd been told not to make a scene, not to overreact, to keep things calm and professional and discreet. She thought about how easy it would be to simply help the woman to a cab, to send her on her way, to let someone else deal with it. But she also thought about her own grandmother, who had suffered a stroke 3 years ago. The doctors had said that every minute counted, that getting help quickly had been the difference between recovery and permanent damage. She thought about how she would feel if someone had seen her grandmother in distress and done nothing because they didn't want to cause a fuss. "I'm sure," Maya said, pulling her phone from her pocket. She looked at Eleanor, at this elegant woman who had walked into the Belmont dressed for dinner and was now lost in a fog of confusion and fear. "I'm calling right now." She stepped a few feet away, still keeping Eleanor in her line of sight, and dialed 911. The line rang once, twice, and then a calm, professional voice answered. 911, what's your emergency?" Maya took a breath. "I'm at the Belmont restaurant on 5th Avenue. I have an elderly woman here who appears to be having some kind of medical emergency. She's disoriented, can't remember where she is or how she got here, and she's showing signs of distress. Trembling, rapid breathing, sweating. I think she needs immediate medical attention." The dispatcher's voice remained steady. "Is she conscious and breathing?" "Yes, she's sitting at a table, but she's very confused and frightened." "All right, we're sending an ambulance to your location now. Can you stay with her until they arrive?" "Yes," Maya said. "I'm not leaving her." "Good. Keep her calm if you can. The ambulance should be there within 5 minutes." Maya ended the call and returned to Eleanor's side. The woman looked up at her, and there was something in her expression, a moment of clarity breaking through the fog. "You called for help," she said softly. "I did," Maya confirmed, kneeling beside the table so they were at eye level. "Because I think you need it, and I want to make sure you're safe." A single tear rolled down Eleanor's cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm so frightened." "I know," Maya said, reaching out and taking Eleanor's trembling hand in her own. "But you're not alone. I'm right here with you, and help is on the way." Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant rhythm, oblivious to the small drama unfolding at table 4. But for Maya, the world had narrowed to this moment, to this woman who needed help, to the decision she had made that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. The 5 minutes that followed felt like an eternity compressed into heartbeats. Maya stayed at Eleanor's side, holding her hand and speaking in soft, reassuring tones. She told Eleanor about the weather, about the beautiful flowers in the window boxes outside, about anything that might anchor the frightened woman to something real and present. Eleanor's grip on her hand was surprisingly strong, desperate, like someone holding onto a lifeline in turbulent waters. The other diners had begun to notice. Maya could feel their curious glances, the subtle shift in the room's energy as people realized something unusual was happening. Marcus Belmont himself, the restaurant's owner and namesake, emerged from his office near the bar. He was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from decades of running one of the city's finest establishments. His expression as he approached was one of concern mixed with the careful neutrality of someone trying to assess a situation without jumping conclusions. Maya, Claire filled him in quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The lady at table 4 appears to be having some kind of episode. Maya called 911. Marcus's eyes moved from Maya to Eleanor, taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who had handled countless unexpected situations. His expression softened immediately. He walked over to the table with measured steps, his presence commanding but not threatening. Mirza Whitmore, he said gently, and Maya felt Eleanor's hand tighten in hers at the sound of her name. Eleanor looked up at Marcus with those confused, frightened eyes. I'm Marcus Belmont. You're in my restaurant and you're safe here. We've called for medical assistance and they'll be here very soon. I don't understand, Eleanor said, her voice thin and reedy. I was supposed to meet Richard, my son. He works so hard. I wanted to surprise him with dinner. I'm sure he'll be very pleased when he hears about it, Marcus said with genuine warmth. Right now, the most important thing is making sure you're feeling well. The distant wail of a siren cut through the city noise, growing louder with each passing second. Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. Help was coming. She had made the right call. Within moments, 2 paramedics entered the restaurant, moving with the efficient calm of professionals who dealt with emergencies every day. One was a woman in her 40s with short dark hair and kind eyes, the other a younger man with broad shoulders and an earnest expression. The female paramedic, whose name tag read J. Morrison, approached the table with her medical bag. Hello there, she said to Eleanor, her voice warm and professional. I'm Jennifer, and this is my partner Kyle. We're here to help you. Can you tell me your name? Eleanor, the elderly woman said, but her voice was uncertain, as if she wasn't entirely sure that was correct. Eleanor Whitmore, Maya supplied, still holding the woman's hand. She came in about 15 minutes ago. She was disoriented. Couldn't remember where she was or how she got here. She's been having tremors, rapid breathing, sweating, and she's very frightened. Jennifer nodded, already pulling out her equipment. Eleanor, I'm going to check a few things, okay? Just to make sure everything's all right. Is that okay with you? Eleanor nodded, her eyes darting between Jennifer and Maya. Will she stay? She asked, gesturing weakly toward Maya. Please, I don't want to be alone. Jennifer glanced at Maya with a question in her eyes. Maya nodded immediately. I'm not going anywhere, she assured Eleanor. Over the next few minutes, Jennifer and Kyle worked with quiet efficiency. They checked Eleanor's blood pressure, her pulse, her oxygen levels. They asked her questions, simple things. Do you know what day it is? Can you tell me where you live? Can you squeeze my hand? Eleanor's answers were confused and inconsistent. She thought it was Tuesday when it was Thursday. She couldn't remember her dress. Her grip was weak on one side, stronger on the other. Maya watched the paramedics exchange a significant look. We need to transport her, Jennifer said quietly to Kyle, but loudly enough that Maya could hear. Possible stroke or TIA. She turned to Eleanor. We're going to take you to the hospital so the doctors can check you out properly, okay? No, Eleanor said, sudden panic flooding her features. No, I need to find Richard. He's waiting for me. We'll make sure Richard knows where you are, Jennifer assured her. But right now, we need to get you checked out by a doctor. It's very important. Maya leaned in close. Eleanor, I promise we'll find your son and let him know what's happening. But these wonderful people need to take you to the hospital to make sure you're okay. I'll help find Richard, I promise. There was something in Maya's voice, some quality of absolute sincerity that seemed to reach through Eleanor's. The elderly woman's eyes locked onto Maya's, searching, and then she gave a small, trembling nod. You promise? She whispered. I promise, Maya said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. As the paramedics prepared Eleanor for transport, bringing in a stretcher and helping her onto it with gentle efficiency, Maya turned to Marcus. I need to find her son. Do we have any information? Did she make a reservation? Marcus shook his head. She was a walk-in, but he pulled out his phone. I know who Eleanor Whitmore is. Or rather, I know who her son is. Richard Whitmore. He's the CEO of Whitmore International, the tech company. They're one of the largest corporations in the city. Maya felt her stomach drop. A CEO. She had just called 911 for the mother of one of the most powerful men in the city. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she overreacted? Would he be angry that she'd caused a scene? But then she looked at Eleanor being carefully secured on the stretcher, still frightened and confused, and she knew she'd made the right choice. This woman's son's position didn't matter. What mattered was that Eleanor had needed help, and Maya had provided it. Do you have his contact information? Maya asked. Marcus was already scrolling through his phone. I have the main line for Whitmore International. It's after hours, but they'll have an emergency contact. He stepped away, phone to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. The paramedics were ready to leave. Eleanor's eyes found Maya one last time. Thank you, she said, the words clear despite her confusion. You're a kind girl. You're going to be just fine, Maya told her, giving her hand one last gentle squeeze before the paramedics wheeled her toward the door. The other diners watched in respectful silence as the stretcher passed through the elegant dining room, a stark reminder that behind the veneer of wealth and privilege, human vulnerability remained universal. As the ambulance pulled away, lights flashing but siren mercifully quiet, Marcus returned to Maya's side. His expression was grave. "I spoke to someone in their executive office. Richard Whitmore is in a board meeting, but they're pulling him out now. They're sending him the hospital information." He looked at Maya, and there was something in his eyes that might have been respect, might have been concern. "You did the right thing, Maya. That woman was in real trouble." "I hope so," Maya said, and she realized she was shaking slightly, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. "Go take a 15-minute break," Marcus said. "Claire can cover your section. You've earned it." Maya nodded gratefully and made her way to the small break room behind the kitchen. It was a cramped space with a few lockers, a small table, and a coffee maker that had seen better days. She sank into one of the plastic chairs and pressed her hands to her face, taking deep, steadying breaths. She had just made a decision that could have gone terribly wrong. If Eleanor hadn't actually been in medical distress, if it had just been confusion or anxiety, Maya could have been reprimanded for causing an unnecessary disruption. The Belmont prided itself on discretion, on handling situations quietly and professionally. Calling 911 for a wealthy patron was the kind of thing that could get you fired if it turned out to be an overreaction. But it hadn't been an overreaction. Maya knew that in her bones the symptoms had been real. The fear in Eleanor's eyes had been genuine. Whatever was happening to that woman, it was serious, and getting her to a hospital quickly could very well have saved her life. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a message from one of her co-workers, but instead saw a text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Richard Whitmore. I'm told you're the waitress who called 911 for my mother. I'm on my way to St. Catherine's Hospital now. Thank you for taking care of her. I'll be in touch." Maya stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure she'd understood correctly. Richard Whitmore, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, had personally texted her to say thank you. The formality of the message, the controlled gratitude, told her that he was a man who kept his emotions carefully managed. But beneath that control, she could sense genuine concern for his mother. She typed out a quick response. "I'm glad I could help. I hope she's going to be okay." The response came almost immediately. "Thanks to you, she has a chance. More than she would have had if you hadn't acted. The doctors are with her now." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. She had made a difference. In a job where she often felt invisible, where her role was to serve and then disappear into the background, she had actually mattered. She had seen someone in trouble and she had helped. She returned to the dining room 10 minutes later, her composure restored. Her section had been managed efficiently by Claire and another server, and the evening continued its smooth flow. But Maya couldn't quite shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. She had crossed some invisible line between simply doing her job and actually making a choice that mattered. As she moved through the rest of her shift, taking orders and serving meals and clearing plates, she found herself thinking about Eleanor Whitmore. Was she at the hospital now? Were the doctors figuring out what was wrong? Was her son at her side? The questions circled in her mind like birds looking for a place to land. It wasn't until the end of her shift, as she was counting out her tips in the back room, that Marcus found her again. "Maya," he said, his expression unreadable. "I just got off the phone with someone from Whitmore International. Eleanor Whitmore had a stroke, a significant one. The doctors said that getting her to the hospital as quickly as we did may have saved her life. They were able to administer clot-busting medication within the critical window because you acted so fast." Maya felt the weight of those words settle over her. A stroke. She had been right, and her quick action had mattered. It had actually mattered. "Richard Whitmore wants to meet with you," Marcus continued. "Tomorrow, if you're available. He wants to thank you personally." Tomorrow was her day off, but Maya found herself nodding. "Of course. And what time?" "He'll be here at 10 in the morning." Marcus paused, then added quietly, "You've saved that woman's life tonight, Maya. Don't ever doubt that." As Maya walked home through the city streets that night, the cool air sharp against her face, she felt different, lighter somehow. Despite the exhaustion in her bones, she had trusted her instincts. She had acted with compassion and courage, and because of that, Eleanor Whitmore was alive. She had no idea that the real story was only just beginning. Maya didn't sleep well that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eleanor Whitmore's terrified face, heard the tremor in her voice as she said she was frightened. The image replayed in her mind like a film stuck on loop, each viewing bringing with it a fresh wave of what-ifs. What if she hadn't noticed? What if she'd simply sent Eleanor away in a cab? What if she'd listened to that voice of caution that told her not to make a scene? But she had noticed, she had acted, and Eleanor was alive because of it. She woke at 7, an hour before her alarm, and lay in her small studio apartment watching the morning light creep across the ceiling. The space was modest, a single room with a kitchenette tucked into one corner and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in, but it was hers. The rent consumed most of her paycheck, leaving little for luxuries. But she'd made it home with secondhand furniture painted white, plants clustered on the windowsill, and photographs taped to the walls. Pictures of her family back in Ohio, her college friends scattered across the country, moments of joy captured and preserved. She got up and made coffee in her small French press, the ritual helping to calm her nerves. Today she would meet Richard Whitmore, a man who existed in a completely different stratosphere of society. She'd read about him, of course. Everyone had. He'd taken over Whitmore International when he was only 32, transforming it from a mid-sized software company into a global technology powerhouse. He was now 45. Unmarried according to the tabloids, and worth an estimated $8 billion. The business magazines called him brilliant but ruthless, a man who made decisions with surgical precision and never looked back. Maya showered and dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress that was professional without trying too hard, paired with the same flats she wore to work. She dried her hair and left it down, applied minimal makeup, and studied herself in the mirror. She looked presentable, composed, like someone who could handle an unexpected meeting with a billionaire CEO without falling apart. She arrived at the Belmont at 9:45. The restaurant was closed for its morning cleaning and prep, the dining room empty and echoing without the usual bustle of service. The morning light through the tall windows made everything look different, softer, less theatrical. Marcus was already there, along with Claire and a few of the kitchen staff preparing for lunch service. "He's in the private dining room," Marcus told her, gesturing toward a door near the back. "He arrived 10 minutes ago. Very punctual, very polite." He paused, giving Maya an encouraging look. "Just be yourself. You have nothing to be nervous about. You're the hero of this story." But Maya didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a waitress who had simply done what anyone would do in the same situation. She walked to the private dining room, knocked softly, and opened the door. Richard Whitmore stood by the window, his back to her, looking out at the street below. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with dark hair that was graying at the temples and the kind of posture that spoke of confidence and control. He wore a charcoal suit that was clearly bespoke, the fabric draping perfectly across his shoulders. And when he turned to face her, Maya was struck by the intensity of his gaze. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held a weight of intelligence and assessment that made her feel suddenly exposed. "Maya Chun," he said, and it wasn't a question. He crossed the room in a few long strides and extended his hand. "I'm Richard Whitmore. Thank you for meeting with me." His handshake was firm, his palm warm. "Of course," Maya said, finding her voice. "How is your mother? Is she okay?" Richard gestured to the table where 2 cups of coffee sat waiting, along with a plate of pastries that looked like they'd come from the city's finest bakery. "Please sit. Let me tell you what happened." They settled into the chairs, and for a moment Richard simply looked at her as if trying to understand who she was and why she'd done what she did. Then he began to speak, his voice controlled but carrying an undercurrent of emotion that he was clearly working to contain. "My mother had an ischemic stroke," he said. "Its blood clot blocked an artery in her brain. The doctors told me that the window for administering TPA, the clot-busting medication, is approximately 4.5 hours from the onset of symptoms. After that, the risks outweigh the benefits. My mother received that medication at St. Catherine's Hospital exactly 3 hours after her symptoms began." He paused, and something flickered across his face. "They believe you called 911 within 30 minutes of her walking into this restaurant." Maya nodded slowly. She was very confused. Couldn't remember where she was or why she was here. "She was looking for you, actually. She thought you were meeting her for dinner." Richard's jaw tightened. "We had plans for dinner next week, at her home. She must have gotten confused about the day." He looked down at his hands, and Maya saw them clench briefly before relaxing. "My mother has been showing signs of cognitive decline for the past year. Nothing dramatic. Forgetting appointments, misplacing things, repeating herself. I've been trying to get her to see a specialist, but she's stubborn. She insisted she was fine, that it was just normal aging." "I'm sorry," Maya said quietly, not sure what else to offer. "The stroke was a warning," Richard continued, looking up at her again. "A serious one. She has damage to her left hemisphere, which affects her speech and mobility on her right side. The doctors are cautiously optimistic about her recovery, but take time, extensive rehabilitation." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "But here's what matters. They told me that if she hadn't received treatment when she did, if she'd wandered around for another hour or two, the stroke would have caused catastrophic, permanent damage. She might not have survived. And if she had, she wouldn't have been herself anymore." The weight of his words settled over the table like a physical presence. Maya felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She'd known her actions had mattered, but hearing it stated so starkly, understanding that Eleanor Whitmore's entire future had hinged on those critical minutes, was overwhelming. "You saved my mother's life," Richard said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word life. He cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "I don't say that lightly. I've spent my entire career making decisions, weighing risks, calculating outcomes. I know what the odds were. I know what would have happened if you hadn't acted. So when I say you saved her life, I mean it absolutely and literally. I just did what anyone would do," Maya said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. Many people wouldn't have acted. Many people would have looked away, assumed someone else would handle it, avoided the complication. "No," Richard said firmly, "not anyone. Most people would have hesitated, second-guessed themselves, worried about overreacting or causing a scene. You didn't hesitate. You saw someone in trouble, and you helped. That takes courage and compassion, and those qualities are rarer than you might think." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the table between them. "Inside this is a check for $50,000. It's inadequate, I know. There's no sum of money that equals the value of my mother's life, but I want you to have it as a token of my gratitude." Maya stared at the envelope, her mind struggling to process the number he'd just said. $50,000. That was more than she made in 2 years. It was life-changing money. It could pay off her student loans, give her a safety net, allow her to breathe for the first time in years, but something about it felt wrong. She had helped Eleanor because it was the right thing to do, not for a reward. Taking money for it would somehow taint the purity of that choice, would turn an act of compassion into a transaction. "I can't accept this," she said quietly, pushing the envelope back toward him. Richard's eyebrows rose, the first sign of surprise she'd seen from him. "I'm sorry?" "It's incredibly generous," Maya said, choosing her words carefully. "But I didn't help your mother because I wanted money. I helped her because she needed help. That's all. I don't want to be paid for doing the right thing." For a long moment, Richard simply stared at her, and Maya couldn't read his expression. She wondered if she'd offended him, if he thought she was being foolish or prideful. Then slowly, something changed in his face. The carefully controlled mask slipped slightly, and she saw genuine emotion beneath it. Respect, perhaps, or something deeper. "You're remarkable," he said finally. "Do you know that?" "I'm really not," Maya insisted. "I'm just a waitress who pays attention to people. A waitress who saved my mother's life," Richard corrected. He picked up the envelope and tucked it back into his pocket. "All right. No check, but please let me do something. There must be something you need, something I can help with." Maya hesitated. There was something, actually. A dream she'd been carrying for years, but had never had the resources to pursue. Before she could second-guess herself, she said it aloud. "I want to go back to school. I have a bachelor's degree in social work, but I want to get my master's. I want to work with elderly patients, help families navigate the healthcare system, advocate for people who can't advocate for themselves. But graduate school is expensive, and I can't afford to stop working full-time, and the programs that would allow me to do both don't offer much financial aid." She stopped, feeling suddenly embarrassed. It sounded naive when said aloud, this dream of helping people when she could barely help herself. But Richard was nodding slowly, his expression thoughtful. "That's perfect. It's more than perfect, actually. It's fitting." He pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. "I'm sending you the contact information for my assistant, Melissa. She arranged for a full scholarship to whatever graduate program you choose, along with a living stipend so you can reduce your work hours and focus on your studies." Maya opened her mouth to protest, but Richard held up a hand. "This isn't charity, this is an investment. My mother's stroke has made me realize how inadequate our healthcare system is for elderly patients and their families. Want to start a foundation? Something focused on early detection and intervention for cognitive decline and stroke prevention? I'd like you to be involved in developing it, bringing the perspective of someone who actually understands the human side of these issues." "You want me to help run a foundation?" Maya asked, certain she'd misunderstood. "Not run it. I'll hire professionals for that, but help shape it. Be on the advisory board. Use your education and your instincts to make sure we're actually helping people, not just writing checks and feeling good about ourselves." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady on hers. "You have a gift, Maya. You see people. Really see them. That's valuable. More valuable than most of what passes for value in my world." Maya felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful. Her life had been a carefully managed series of survival strategies, getting through each day, each week, each month, and now this man was offering her a chance to transform everything, to pursue her dreams, to make a real difference in the world. "Okay," she said, and even she could hear the tremor of emotion in her voice. "Okay. Yes, thank you." Richard smiled then, a real smile that transformed his severe features into something warmer and more human. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For my mother. For agreeing to this. For being the kind of person who acts when action is needed." They talked for another hour, Richard asking questions about her background, her interests, her vision for what a foundation might do. He listened with complete attention, occasionally making notes on his phone, treating her ideas with the same seriousness he would bring to a business negotiation. By the time they finished, Maya felt like she'd been through an intense job interview, except the job was helping to shape something meaningful and important. As they stood to leave, Richard hesitated. "My mother wants to meet you. When she's stronger, when she can speak more easily, she remembers you. She told me in halting words about the kind waitress who held her hand. Would you be willing to visit her?" "Of course," Maya said immediately. "I'd love to see her. She'll be in rehabilitation for at least a month. But I'll be in touch." Richard extended his hand again, and Maya shook it, feeling the firmness of his grip, the warmth of his palm. "My mother is alive because of you. I'll never forget that." As Maya walked out of the Belmont into the bright morning sunshine, she felt like she was stepping into a different life, one full of possibilities she'd never imagined. She had simply tried to help someone in need, and somehow that single act of compassion had opened a door to an entirely new The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of surreal activity. Maya continued working at the Belmont, but everything felt different now, colored by the knowledge that her life was about to change in ways she was still struggling to comprehend. Richard Whitmore's assistant, Melissa, turned out to be a brisk, efficient woman in her early 30s who treated Maya's graduate school plans with the same focused intensity she probably brought to a billion-dollar business deal. Within a week, Maya had received acceptance letters from 4 prestigious social work programs, all offering full scholarships that covered not just tuition but also provided a generous living stipend. The speed of it was dizzying. She'd been preparing to spend months on applications, to scrape together money for fees, to write and rewrite essays until they were perfect. Instead, Melissa had handled everything with a few strategic phone calls and carefully worded emails that made it clear Richard Whitmore was personally invested in Maya's education. Maya chose Columbia University's School of Social Work, a program known for its focus on healthcare and aging populations. The classes would start in the fall, giving her a few months to prepare and transition. Marcus, when she told him, had been gracious and supportive, offering to keep her on part-time hours so she could maintain some income and stay connected to the restaurant that had become a second home. But the most important change came 3 weeks after that morning meeting when Melissa called to tell her that Eleanor Whitmore was ready for visitors. Maya felt her heart race at the news. She'd thought about Eleanor constantly, wondering how her recovery was progressing, hoping that the brave, elegant woman she'd met so briefly was finding her way back to herself. Catherine's Rehabilitation Center occupied the top 3 floors of a modern medical building on the Upper East Side. It was the kind of facility that catered to wealthy patients with spacious private rooms, attentive staff, and amenities that made it feel more like a high-end hotel than a hospital. Maya signed in at the reception desk, received a visitor's badge, and took the elevator to the 7th floor, her stomach tight with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. Eleanor's room was at the end of a quiet hallway, the door slightly ajar. Maya knocked softly and heard a woman's voice call out, "Come in." She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was flooded with afternoon sunlight from large windows that looked out over the city. Eleanor sat in a wheelchair near the window, dressed in a soft lavender cardigan and comfortable slacks, her white hair freshly styled. She looked smaller than Maya remembered, more fragile, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that had been absent during their first meeting. Next to her in a comfortable armchair sat Richard Whitmore, his tie loosened and his jacket draped over the back of the chair. He looked less like a CEO and more like a devoted son. Eleanor's face lit up when she saw Maya, and she raised her left hand in greeting. Her right arm remained in her lap, the hand curled slightly inward. "Maya," she said, her speech slightly slurred but understandable. "You came." "Of course I came," Maya said, crossing the room and taking Eleanor's outstretched hand. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Eleanor said, and then with a wry smile added, slower, "My words hide from me sometimes, but I'm here. Thanks to you." Richard stood and offered Maya his chair. "Please, sit. I'll grab another from the hallway." He disappeared briefly and returned with a second chair, positioning it so the 3 of them formed a small circle by the window. For the next hour, Maya sat with Eleanor and Richard, listening as Eleanor talked about her recovery, her frustrations with the limitations of her body, and her determination to get stronger. She spoke slowly and sometimes struggled to find words, but her mind was clearly sharp. She asked Maya about her work, her life, her plans for school, and listened with genuine interest to every answer. Richard, Maya noticed, watched his mother with a mixture of love and concern that was touching to witness. He anticipated her needs before she could voice them, adjusting her blanket when she seemed cold, fetching water when her speech became strained. The ruthless CEO of the business magazines was nowhere in evidence. Here was simply a son caring for his mother. "Tell me what you remember," Eleanor said eventually, her gaze fixed on Maya. "From that night, I have pieces, fragments, but it's like a puzzle with missing parts." Maya described the evening at the restaurant, Eleanor's confusion and fear, the decision to call 911. She spoke gently, aware that the memory might be difficult for Eleanor to hear. "You kept asking for Richard," Maya said. "You were so worried that he was waiting for you that he'd be concerned." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I don't remember being frightened, but I remember your hand holding mine. I remember thinking, this girl won't let me be lost." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, made Maya's throat tight. "I couldn't," she said. "You reminded me of my own grandmother. I would have wanted someone to help her the same way." "Tell me about her," Eleanor said, and so Maya did. She talked about her grandmother Rose, who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when Maya was 8. Rose had been a teacher, a woman of fierce intelligence and gentle humor who had filled Maya's childhood with books and stories and the unwavering belief that she could become anything she wanted. Rose had died during Maya's junior year of college, a heart attack that had come without warning, and Maya still missed her with an ache that never quite faded. "She sounds wonderful," Eleanor said when Maya finished. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Maya said, and meant it. As the afternoon wore on, a nurse came to remind Eleanor that it was time for her physical therapy session. Eleanor sighed but nodded. "The dictators and scrubs," she said with a smile. "They run this place. And they're doing an excellent job," Richard added, standing and helping his mother prepare for the transfer from wheelchair to walker. Before Maya could leave, Eleanor reached out and caught her hand again. "Come back," she said. "Please. It helps having you here." "I will," Maya promised, "as often as you'd like." In the hallway, Richard walked Maya to the elevator. "Thank you for coming," he said. She's been looking forward to this visit all week. It's given her something to focus on beyond the therapy and the endless medical evaluations. She's remarkable, Maya said. Her strength, her spirit, even after everything that's happened. She is, Richard agreed, but she's also scared. The stroke has shaken her confidence. She's afraid of losing herself, of becoming a burden. Having you in her life, it's helping her see that recovery isn't just about regaining physical function. It's about maintaining connections, about being valued as a person. They reached the elevator and Richard pressed the button. Then he turned to Maya with an expression of unusual intellectual vulnerability. Can I ask you something? Of course. The foundation I mentioned, the one focused on stroke prevention and cognitive health. Would you be willing to meet with the team we're assembling? Not just as an advisor, but as someone who can help us understand what people actually need when they're facing these challenges. You have insights that none of the medical professionals we're consulting can provide. I'm just starting graduate school, Maya said, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. I don't know if I'm qualified to advise on something so important. You're more qualified than you think, Richard said. You've lived it. You've experienced the fear and confusion from the family side, and you have the compassion to see patients as people, not just cases. That's invaluable. The elevator arrived and Maya stepped inside. Okay, she said. Yes, I'll help however I can. Richard nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. I'll have Melissa set up a meeting. And Maya, he added as the doors began to close, my mother asked me to tell you something. She wanted me to make sure you knew that you didn't just save her life. You gave her a reason to fight for it. The doors closed and Maya rode down alone, her vision blurred with tears. She had walked into work that Thursday night expecting nothing more than another ordinary shift, another evening of serving food and clearing plates and smiling at strangers. Instead, she had stumbled into something profound, a connection that was transforming not just her own life but the lives of others. Over the following weeks, Maya fell into a new rhythm. She visited Eleanor twice a week, timing her visits to coincide with the late afternoon when Eleanor was typically most alert and energetic. They would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying companionable silence while looking out at the city below. Eleanor's recovery was progressing steadily. Her speech improved, though she still struggled with complex words. Her mobility on her right side was returning gradually, the physical therapy slowly rewiring the neural pathways damaged by the stroke. Maya also began attending meetings for the foundation Richard was creating. The team he'd assembled was impressive and slightly intimidating. There were neurologists from top hospitals, researchers studying stroke prevention, healthcare policy experts, and philanthropic advisors who specialized in medical foundations. And there was Maya, a waitress without even a graduate degree yet, sitting at a conference table and offering her perspective. At first, she'd been hesitant to speak, certain that her insights would seem naive or obvious compared to the expertise surrounding her. But Richard had encouraged her to share her thoughts, and gradually she'd found her voice. She talked about the gaps in the system, the way families were left to navigate complex medical decisions without adequate support. She described the fear and confusion that accompanied cognitive decline, the shame and isolation that often prevented people from seeking help. She spoke from the heart, from experience, and to her surprise, people listened. The foundation, when it officially launched 6 months later, would bear the Eleanor Whitmore Center for Cognitive Health and Stroke Prevention. It would fund research, provide education, and offer support services to families facing these challenges. But more than that, it would treat patients and their families with dignity and compassion, recognizing that behind every medical case was a human story. Maya's first semester at Columbia was challenging but exhilarating. She threw herself into her studies with a passion that surprised even her professors. She was older than most of her classmates, more experienced in the realities of life, and that perspective informed everything she learned. She wasn't studying theory in a vacuum. She was preparing to make a real difference in people's lives, and that gave her work a sense of purpose that sustained her through the long nights of reading and writing papers. Through it all, her friendship with Eleanor deepened. Eleanor left the rehabilitation center after 2 months and returned to her home, a beautiful brownstone in the West Village with a private garden and rooms filled with art and books. Maya visited regularly, and they would have tea in the garden when the weather was nice or sit by the fireplace when it was cold. Eleanor told stories about her life, her late husband, who had been a professor of literature, the early years of Richard's childhood, the joys and sorrows that had shaped her, and Maya shared her own story, the struggles and triumphs that had brought her to this unexpected place. It was Eleanor who first suggested that Maya might be developing feelings for Richard that went beyond professional respect and friendship. They were having tea one autumn afternoon, the garden ablaze with color, when Eleanor said casually, "He talks about you constantly, you know, my son." Maya, who had been in the process of taking a sip of tea, nearly choked. Eleanor smiled at Maya's flustered reaction, her eyes twinkling with the kind of mischief that suggested the stroke hadn't dulled her perceptiveness at all. "Oh, don't look so surprised, dear. Mother notices these things. He asks about you every time we speak. How are your classes going? What did you think of the latest foundation proposal? Did you see the article Maya wrote for the Healthcare Journal? It's really quite endearing." Maya set down her teacup carefully, buying herself a moment to compose her thoughts. "Eleanor, Richard, and I work together. We're colleagues. Friends, maybe. That's all." "Is it?" Eleanor asked gently, tilting her head. "Because the way your face lights up when he walks into a room suggests otherwise, and the way his entire demeanor softens when he sees you, well, I haven't seen my son look at anyone like that in a very long time." Maya felt heat rise to her cheeks. She'd been trying very hard not to think about Richard Whitmore in any capacity beyond the professional. Yes, he was handsome in that severe intellectual way. Yes, he was brilliant and successful and surprisingly kind beneath his controlled exterior. And yes, her heart did seem to beat a little faster when he entered a room. But acknowledging those feelings felt dangerous, like standing on the edge of a cliff and contemplating the drop. "He's your son," Maya said, as if that explained everything. "And he's He's Richard Whitmore. I'm a waitress going to graduate school. Eleanor's expression turned serious, the playfulness fading. Maya Chun, you are a remarkable young woman who saved my life and is now changing the landscape of healthcare advocacy. The fact that you still work as a waitress to support yourself shows character, not inadequacy. And my son, despite all his success and wealth, is just a man. A good man, a lonely man who has spent too many years building an empire and not enough years building a life. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with truth and possibility. Maya thought about Richard, about the glimpses she'd seen beneath his polished exterior, the way he sat with his mother for hours, reading to her when she was too tired to speak, the passion in his voice when he talked about the Foundation's mission, the rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face when something truly pleased him. She'd seen vulnerability there, a deep well of emotion he kept carefully guarded. I don't know what to do with this, Maya admitted quietly. I never expected any of this. 6 months ago, I was just trying to pay my bills and get through each day. Now I'm in graduate school working on a foundation that could help thousands. You're telling me that your billionaire son might have feelings for me? It feels like a dream I'm going to wake up from. Life has a way of surprising us, Eleanor said, reaching across the small table to pat Maya's hand. The stroke taught me that. One moment you think you understand the shape of your world, and the next everything changes. What matters is how we respond to those changes. Do we retreat in fear, or do we move forward with courage? Before Maya could respond, they heard the sound of the front door opening and Richard's voice calling out, "Mother, I'm here. I brought dinner from that Italian place you like." Eleanor gave Maya a knowing look and called back, "We're in the garden, dear." Richard appeared a moment later, carrying bags that smelled of garlic and basil, and when his eyes found Maya, his entire expression shifted. The professional mask he wore like armor slipped, and for just a moment Maya saw what Eleanor had been talking about. There was warmth there, genuine pleasure at seeing her, something that went beyond collegiality. "Maya," he said, and her name on his lips felt different than when others spoke it. "I didn't know you were visiting today. If I'd known, I would have brought more food." "There's always enough," Eleanor said smoothly. "Maya, you'll stay for dinner, won't you?" Maya knew she should decline, should maintain some professional distance, should not allow herself to be drawn further into this family's orbit, but she found herself nodding. "I'd love to." They ate in the dining room, a beautiful space with a long wooden table and walls lined with bookshelves. Richard had indeed brought enough food, as if he'd unconsciously hoped Maya might be there. They shared pasta and salad and crusty bread, and the conversation flowed easily. Moving from Maya's latest class on healthcare ethics to a new research paper on early stroke detection that Richard wanted the foundation to fund, Maya watched the interplay between mother and son, the easy affection, the way Richard anticipated Eleanor's needs without making her feel diminished. He cut her food into smaller pieces without drawing attention to it, refilled her water glass before she had to ask, and listened to her opinions with genuine respect. This was what love looked like, Maya thought. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but small acts of care repeated daily until they became as natural as breathing. After dinner, Eleanor claimed fatigue and excused herself, leaving Maya and Richard alone in the kitchen as they cleaned up. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, Maya washing dishes while Richard dried, until he finally spoke. "I'm glad you were here tonight. It's been a difficult week, and coming home to find you here with my mother, it made everything feel lighter somehow." Maya glanced at him, surprised by the admission. Difficult how? "Is everything all right with the foundation?" "The foundation is fine. It's personal matters." He set down the dish towel and leaned against the counter, his expression troubled. "I received some information about my mother's medical history that I should have known years ago. Apparently she'd been experiencing minor cognitive symptoms for longer than I realized, but she hid them from me. She didn't want me to worry or to treat her differently." "That must be hard to learn," Maya said gently. "But Eleanor is independent and proud. She wouldn't want to be seen as diminished in your eyes." "I know, but if I'd known earlier, if I'd insisted she see a specialist, maybe the stroke could have been prevented. Maybe she wouldn't have spent months in rehabilitation fighting to regain abilities that were stolen from her." The guilt in his voice was palpable, and Maya recognized it immediately. She'd seen that same guilt in the faces of countless family members. The weight of what-ifs and if-onlys that accomplished nothing but caused pain. She turned to face him fully, her hands still damp from the dishwater. "Richard, your mother's stroke wasn't your fault. Even if you'd known about the symptoms earlier, even if she'd seen every specialist in the world, the stroke might still have happened. You can't control everything, no matter how much you want to. I built a company on the principle of controlling outcomes," he said with a bitter laugh. "I analyze data, identify risks, and implement solutions, but I couldn't protect the person who matters most to me." "You did protect her," Maya insisted. "You gave her a life where she felt valued and capable right up until that night. You didn't treat her like she was fragile or broken. You respected her autonomy, and when the crisis came, you were there immediately. You've been there every day since. That's not failure, that's love." Something in Richard's expression cracked then, the careful control slipping away to reveal raw emotion beneath. "How do you do that?" he asked quietly. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "I don't," Maya admitted. "I just say what I feel, what I believe to be true, and I believe your mother is incredibly lucky to have a son who cares as much as you do." They stood there in the kitchen, the space between them charged with something unspoken but undeniable. Richard took a small step closer, and Maya's breath caught. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the desire warring with restraint, the longing held in check by propriety. "Maya," he said, and there was a question in his voice, in the way he said her name, in the way he looked at her like she was something precious and terrifying all at once. But before either of them could move, could acknowledge what was building between them, Eleanor's voice called from upstairs. "Richard, could you help me with something?" The moment broke. Richard stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "I should," he began. "Go," Maya said, finding her voice. "She needs you." He nodded and started toward the stairs, then paused and looked back at her. "Thank you. For tonight. For everything." After he'd gone upstairs, Maya stood alone in the kitchen, her heart racing, her mind whirling with emotions she'd been trying to deny. She was falling for Richard Whitmore. If she was honest with herself, she already had fallen. And that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She gathered her things quietly and let herself out, walking through the cool autumn evening toward the subway. The city was alive around her, 1,000 stories unfolding in every direction, and she was caught in the middle of one she'd never anticipated. She'd thought saving Eleanor's life was the end of the story, the culmination of a dramatic evening. Instead, it had been the beginning of something far more complex and profound. Over the following weeks, Maya threw herself into her schoolwork and foundation duties, trying to create distance between herself and the feelings that threatened to overwhelm her. But Richard seemed to be everywhere. He attended every foundation meeting, sought her input on decisions, and found excuses to call or email about matters that could easily have been handled by his staff. They were dancing around each other, both aware of the attraction, but neither willing to be the first to acknowledge it. The tension was exquisite and maddening. Every interaction charged with subtext, every accidental touch electric. It was Eleanor, finally, forced the issue. She invited Maya to Sunday dinner, specifically requesting that she'd come alone without other foundation staff or colleagues. When Maya arrived, she found the table set for two. "Richard is at a business dinner," Eleanor explained with a smile that was entirely too innocent. "He'll be back around 8. I hope you don't mind keeping an old woman company until then." Maya didn't believe the innocent act for a second, but she settled in for the evening anyway. They had a lovely meal, and Eleanor told stories about Richard's childhood, painting a picture of a serious, thoughtful boy who had always carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "He needs someone to help him remember that life isn't just about building and achieving," Eleanor said as they sat with tea afterward. "He needs someone who sees him, not just the empire he's created. Someone who makes him laugh and challenges him and reminds him that vulnerability isn't weakness." "Eleanor," Maya said gently, "I know what you're doing." "Good," Eleanor replied. "Then you understand that I'm not going to live forever. And before I leave this world, I'd very much like to see my son happy. Truly happy. And I've never seen him the way he is with you." The weight of Eleanor's words settled over Maya like a blanket, warm and heavy and impossible to ignore. She opened her mouth to protest, to list all the reasons why this was complicated and potentially disastrous. But the look in Eleanor's eyes stopped her. It was the look of a mother who understood her child completely, who saw past the armor to the vulnerability beneath, and who was willing to meddle shamelessly if it meant securing his happiness. Before Maya could formulate a response, they heard the front door open. Richard's voice called out earlier than expected. "Mother? Maya? I saw your coat in the hall." The business dinner was canceled at the last minute. Technical difficulties with the video conference setup, apparently. He appeared in the doorway of the living room, still in his suit but with his tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled from the wind. When he saw Maya and Eleanor sitting together, something flickered across his face. Confusion, perhaps, or the dawning realization that he'd been set up. Eleanor rose from her chair with deliberate slowness, using her cane for support. Her recovery had been remarkable, but she still moved carefully, especially in the evenings when fatigue set in. "I'm afraid I'm exhausted," she announced, though her eyes were bright with mischief. "All this talking has worn me out. Richard, would you mind seeing Maya home? It's getting late and I don't like the thought of her on the subway alone at this hour." "Mother, I can take a cab," Maya started, but Eleanor waved her objection away. "Nonsense. Richard has a car and driver. It would be silly for you to pay for a cab when he's going in the same direction." She kissed Maya's cheek, whispered, "Be brave, dear," and then slowly made her way toward the stairs. "Good night, both of you." They watched her go and then stood in awkward silence for a moment, the room suddenly feeling smaller with just the two of them. Richard cleared his throat. "She's not subtle, is she?" "Not even a little bit," Maya agreed, and despite her nervousness, she felt a laugh bubble up. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was walking into an ambush." "Neither did I," Richard said. But there was amusement in his voice now, the tension breaking slightly, though in hindsight I should have known. "My mother has many virtues, but patience has never been one of them." He gestured toward the door. "I do have a car outside. May I give you a ride home?" Maya knew she should decline, should maintain some distance, should not get into a private car with a man she was desperately trying not to fall further in love with. But she also knew that the time for pretending had passed. Whatever was happening between them needed to be addressed, acknowledged, dealt with one way or another. "All right," she said. "Thank you." The car was waiting outside, a sleek black sedan with a driver who greeted Richard with professional deference. They settled into the back seat, the leather soft and the space surprisingly intimate despite the size of the vehicle. Richard gave the driver Maya's address, and they pulled away from the curb, joining the flow of evening traffic. For several blocks, neither of them spoke. Maya stared out the window at the city passing by, the lights and movement, the endless energy of New York at night. She was acutely aware of Richard beside her, the warmth of his presence, the subtle scent of his cologne, the measured rhythm of his breathing. "My mother is trying to play matchmaker," Richard said finally, his voice quiet in the enclosed space. "I apologize if that makes you uncomfortable." "Does it make you uncomfortable?" Maya asked, turning to look at him. He met her gaze, and in the dim light of the car, his eyes were dark and unreadable. "Yes," he admitted, "but not for the reasons you might think. I'm uncomfortable because she's right, and I've been trying very hard to ignore that fact for months now." Maya's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Why have you been ignoring it?" Richard looked away, his jaw tightening. "Because you saved my mother's life. Because you work with the foundation I created. Because there's an enormous power imbalance between us, and I would never want you to feel pressured or obligated. Because I'm 45 years old and you're 26, and I have no right to complicate your life when it's just beginning to open up in front of you." He paused, then added more quietly, "Because I'm terrified that if I allow myself to feel what I'm feeling, and it doesn't work out, I'll lose not just you, but the best thing that's happened to my family in years." The honesty of his words, the vulnerability in his voice, stripped away the last of Maya's defenses. She thought about all the reasons she'd been telling herself this was a bad idea, all the logical arguments against allowing her feelings to develop. But logic had never been particularly good at predicting matters of the heart. "Can I tell you what I think?" she asked softly. "Please. I think you're right that there are complications. The age difference, the professional relationship, the history of how we met, those are all real. But I also think that life is unpredictable and precious, and we don't get unlimited chances at happiness. Your mother's stroke taught me that. One moment everything is normal, and the next everything changes. We can spend our lives being careful and safe and reasonable, or we can take risks on things that matter." "And you think this matters?" Richard asked, turning to face her fully now. Maya took a breath, gathering her courage. "I think I've been falling in love with you since that afternoon in the private dining room when you thanked me for saving your mother. I think every conversation we've had, every meeting, every accidental touch has made it worse. Or better, I'm not sure which. All I know is that I can't stop thinking about you, and I'm tired of pretending I don't feel this way." The car had stopped at a red light, suspended in time between blocks. Richard stared at her, and Maya watched as her words sank in, as the implications registered on his face. Then, slowly, carefully, as if she were something precious and breakable, he reached out and cupped her face in his hand. "I've been in love with you since the moment you refused my check," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Since you looked at me and told me you didn't want to be paid for doing the right thing. I've met countless people in my life, Maya. People who want something from me, who see me as a means to an end, who value what I have rather than who I am. But you've never wanted anything from me except honesty and respect. You see me, the real me, and that's terrifying and wonderful in equal measure." The light turned green and the car moved forward, but neither of them looked away. "What do we do now?" Maya whispered. "I think we stop fighting this," Richard said. "I think we acknowledge that this is complicated and potentially messy and that there are no guarantees, and then we see where it goes anyway." He leaned forward, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Maya didn't want to pull away. She wanted this. Wanted to know what it felt like to kiss this man who had become so important to her life. Their lips met gently at first, tentative, exploring. Then the kiss deepened, and Maya felt herself melting into it, into him, into the rightness of this moment that defied all logic and reason. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, the car was pulling up in front of Maya's building. The driver, to his credit, was staring studiously forward, pretending to notice nothing. Richard looked at Maya's apartment building, then back at her. "Have dinner with me," he said. "A real date. Tomorrow night. Let me take you somewhere nice and spend an entire evening talking to you without agendas or foundation business or anyone else's expectations." "I'd like that," Maya said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Very much." She started to open the car door, but Richard reached out and caught her hand. "Maya," he said seriously, "I meant what I said. This is complicated, and I don't want to hurt you. If at any point this becomes too much, if the scrutiny or the pressure or the reality of my life is overwhelming, please tell me. I'd rather end things cleanly than watch you suffer because of choices I've made." The concern in his voice, the genuine worry that he might somehow damage her, made Maya love him even more. "I'm stronger than I look," she said, "and I'm choosing this with my eyes open. I know who you are, Richard. I've seen you at your most vulnerable with your mother. I've seen you passionate and driven with the foundation. I know this won't be simple, but I also know it's worth trying." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Tomorrow night then, 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock. Maya confirmed. She climbed out of the car and walked to her building, feeling his eyes on her the entire way. When she reached her door and turned back, the car was still there, waiting to make sure she got inside safely. She waved and he waved back, and then the car pulled away into the night. Inside her tiny studio apartment, Maya leaned against the door and closed her eyes, a smile spreading across her face. She was dating Richard Whitmore. She was in love with Richard Whitmore, and he was in love with her. 6 months ago, the idea would have been absurd, impossible, the stuff of fairy tales. But life, she was learning, had a way of writing stories that no one could have predicted. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Thank you for taking a chance on this. On me. Sleep well, Maya, she replied quickly. Thank you for being brave enough to admit what you were feeling. Sweet dreams. The next morning, Maya woke with a sense of anticipation that made it hard to focus on her usual routine. She had classes to attend, papers to write, a shift at the Belmont that evening before her date with Richard. She went through the motions, but her mind kept drifting to that kiss in the car, to the way Richard had looked at her like she was something miraculous and unexpected. At the Belmont, her co-workers noticed her distracted state immediately. You're glowing, Chloe observed during their break. What happened? Did you ace a test? Win the lottery? Maya felt heat rise to her cheeks. She'd been trying to keep her composure, to act normal, but apparently her happiness was written all over her face. Something good, she admitted vaguely. Just a really nice evening. Chloe's eyes narrowed with the gleeful suspicion of someone who sensed gossip. A nice evening? Is there a guy involved? Oh my God, there is. Look at your face. Who is he? Do I know him? Maya laughed, shaking her head. It's new, very new. I don't want to jinx it by talking about it yet. Fine, keep your secrets, Chloe said with mock indignation. But I want details eventually. You've been single the entire time I've known you, so whoever this guy is, he must be something special. He is, Maya said softly, and meant it with her whole heart. Her shift seemed to drag on forever, each minute stretching like taffy. She kept glancing at the clock, mentally calculating how long it would take to get home, shower, change, and make herself presentable for dinner with Richard. He'd told her to dress nicely, but not formally, that they were going somewhere special but comfortable. The ambiguity left her standing in front of her tiny closet for 15 minutes after her shift ended, trying on and discarding outfits until she finally settled on a simple black dress that she'd bought for a friend's wedding 2 years ago. It was elegant without being overdressed, fitted without being too revealing, and it made her feel confident. She spent more time on her hair and makeup than she normally would, blow-drying her dark hair until it fell in soft waves around her shoulders, applying makeup with a careful hand. When she finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked polished, sophisticated, like someone who belonged in Richard Whitmore's world. The car arrived precisely at 7, and Maya's stomach fluttered with nervous excitement as she climbed into the back seat. Richard was already there, and when he saw her, his expression transformed. You look beautiful, he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. Thank you, she replied, taking in his appearance. He wore dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearm. No tie, the top button undone. He looked relaxed in a way she rarely saw him, the corporate armor set aside for the evening. The restaurant he'd chosen was in the West Village, a small Italian place tucked away on a quiet street. It was the kind of establishment that didn't need to advertise, where reservations were made months in advance, and where the owner greeted regular customers by name. When they walked in, the owner, a silver-haired man named Giuseppe, embraced Richard warmly. Mr. Whitmore, it's been too long, and this must be the special guest you mentioned. Giuseppe turned to Maya with a knowing smile. Any friend of Richard's is family here. Come. I have your table ready. He led them to a private corner in the back, a small table set with crisp white linens, candles, and a single rose in a delicate vase. The lighting was soft, the atmosphere intimate, and as Maya sat down, she felt like she'd stepped into a different world. This wasn't the world of the Belmont where she served others. This was a place where she was the guest, where someone was serving her, and it felt strange and wonderful all at once. My mother used to bring me here when I was a child, Richard explained, as Giuseppe poured them each a glass of wine. After my father died, she would take me to dinner here once. She said it was important to maintain ritual, to have moments of beauty even in grief. Giuseppe's family has owned this place for 3 generations. It's one of the few places in the city where I feel like I can just be myself. It's perfect, Maya said, looking around at the cozy space, the other diners speaking in quiet tones, the smell of garlic and fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. Thank you for bringing me here. They ordered food, Giuseppe insisting they try the chef's special preparations. And then they were alone, truly alone, with nothing between them but candlelight and possibility. The conversation flowed icily, naturally, as it always had between them. Richard asked about her classes, and Maya found herself talking about her latest assignment, a research project on family advocacy in healthcare setting. She was passionate about the subject, and Richard listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions, challenging her assumptions in ways that made her think deeper. In turn, Maya asked about Richard's work, not the foundation, but his actual company. She realized she knew surprisingly little about what Whitmore International actually did beyond the general knowledge that it was a technology corporation. Richard explained that they developed software for healthcare systems, programs that helped hospitals manage patient data more efficiently, that reduced medical errors, that improved communication between providers and patients. So in a way, Maya said thoughtfully, your work and mine are aligned. We're both trying to improve healthcare just from different angles. I never thought of it that way, Richard admitted. I've always seen my work as purely business, a way to build something successful and profitable. But you're right. The software we create does help people, even if indirectly. Maybe that's why the foundation has felt so meaningful to me. It's a more direct way of making a difference. Their food arrived, and it was exquisite. Fresh pasta made that morning, sauces that tasted like sunshine and earth, vegetables that had been selected at the farmer's market before dawn. They shared bites from each other's plates, laughing when Maya got sauce on her chin and Richard gently wiped it away with his napkin, the gesture both practical and deeply intimate. As they ate, Richard told her stories about his childhood, about his father who had died when Richard was only 12, about how he'd felt an enormous pressure to be the man of the house, to take care of his mother even though she'd never asked that of him. He talked about building his company from the ground up, the failures and setbacks, the moments when he'd almost given up but pushed through anyway. He spoke of loneliness, of how success had brought wealth and respect but had also isolated him, made it hard to trust whether people valued him for himself or for what he could provide. I've had relationships, he said quietly, looking down at his wine glass, but they never lasted. Either the women wanted the lifestyle more than they wanted me, or they couldn't handle the demands of my work, the travel, the long hours, the fact that I'm not particularly good at turning off my brain and just relaxing. One woman told me I was married to my company and there wasn't room for anyone else. Do you think that's true? Maya asked gently. Richard looked up at her, his dark eyes searching her face. I did, he admitted. Until I met you. With you, I don't feel like I have to be anyone other than who I am. You've seen me at my worst, frantic and scared about my mother. You've seen me in board meetings being ruthless about foundation funding. You've called me out when you thought I was wrong about something, and yet you're still here. That makes me think maybe I'm not as fundamentally broken as I believe. Maya reached across the table and took his hand. You're not broken, Richard. You're human. You've experienced loss and built walls to protect yourself, and that's understandable. But those walls don't have to be permanent. You can let people in. You can let me in. His fingers tightened around hers. I want to, he said, more than I've wanted anything in a very long time. They finished their meal slowly, savoring every moment, and when Giuseppe brought them tiramisu to share, insisting it was on the house, they fed each other bites and laughed like teenagers on a first date, because in many ways that's exactly what they were. Two people discovering each other, finding joy in the simple pleasure of good food and good company. When they finally left the restaurant, the night was cool and clear, the city alive with energy. Richard suggested they walk for a while, and Maya agreed immediately. They strolled through the village, hand in hand, talking and laughing, and stopping occasionally to look in shop windows or admire the architecture. It felt natural, easy, like something they'd been doing for years rather than hours. They ended up at a small park with benches overlooking the Hudson River, the water dark and glittering with reflected light. They sat close together, Maya's head resting on Richard's shoulder, his arm around her waist, and watched boats pass in the distance. This has been the best evening I've had in longer than I can remember, Richard said quietly. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on this. Thank you for asking, Maya replied, for being honest about what you were feeling, for not letting fear stop you. He turned to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. I'm still afraid, he admitted. Afraid that I'll disappoint you somehow, that reality won't live up to whatever you're imagining. Afraid that the complications of my life will become too much. Then we'll deal with them together, Maya said firmly. I'm not going into this blind, Richard. I know who you are. I know your life is complicated and public and demanding, but I also know that what I feel when I'm with you is worth navigating those complications. So stop trying to protect me from you. I'm choosing you, fully aware of what that means. He kissed her then deeply and thoroughly, and Maya felt the last of her reservations dissolve. This was right. They were right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. When Richard finally took her home, walking her to her door like a gentleman from another era, he kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her knees weak. Tomorrow? He asked hopefully. Can I see you tomorrow? I have class until 3, but I'm free after that, Maya said. I'll pick you up at 4. We can do something casual. Maybe just walk through Central Park. I want to spend time with you without fancy restaurants or formal setting. Just us. The next 3 months were a kind of beautiful chaos. Maya and Richard fell into a rhythm that defied all conventional wisdom about relationships. They were from different worlds, separated by age and wealth and experience, and yet somehow they fit together with an ease that surprised them both. Richard would pick Maya up after her classes, and they would spend afternoons walking through the city, discovering hidden bookstores and tiny cafes, talking about everything and nothing. He showed her New York through his eyes, sharing places that held meaning for him, stories about his past that he'd never told anyone else. In turn, Maya brought lightness into Richard's carefully controlled life. She dragged him to a comedy show in a basement club where they sat on folding chairs and laughed until their sides hurt. She convinced him to take a cooking class where they made pasta from scratch and created such a mess that the instructor diplomatically suggested they might want to stick to eating out. She taught him how to see the city not as a collection of assets and investments, but as a living, breathing organism full of beauty and unexpected joy. Eleanor watched their relationship blossom with obvious delight. Maya visited her regularly, sometimes with Richard, sometimes alone, and the bond between them deepened into genuine friendship. Eleanor's recovery continued steadily. Her speech had improved dramatically, and while she still used a cane and tired easily, she had regained much of her independence. She told Maya that having something to be excited about, namely her son's newfound happiness, had given her a reason to push harder in therapy, to fight for every bit of progress. But the relationship wasn't without its challenge. The first came when a gossip blog published photos of Richard and Maya leaving a theater together, her hand in his, his arm around her waist. The headline read, "Tech Billionaire Richard Whitmore's Mystery Woman. Who is she?" Within hours, Maya's social media was flooded with messages from strangers, some curious, some congratulatory, some viciously cruel. "She's just after his money," one comment read. "Gold digger alert," said another. "She's pretty but way too young for him," a third observed with casual cruelty. Maya had known this would happen eventually, that dating someone as prominent as Richard would mean giving up a degree of privacy. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it were two different things. She sat in her apartment staring at her phone, feeling exposed and vulnerable, like her private life had been ripped open for public consumption. Richard called within the hour, his voice tight with anger. "I've seen the blog. I'm sorry, Maya. I should have prepared you better for this. You want me to have my lawyer send a cease and desist?" "No," Maya said, taking a deep breath and trying to center herself. "That would just make it bigger. It's fine. I just need to adjust to this new reality where strangers feel entitled to opinions about my life." "You shouldn't have to adjust to anything," Richard said fiercely. "You deserve privacy and respect. These people don't know you." "They don't know us, I know," Maya said softly. "And I'm okay, really. It's just strange, that's all. But I knew what I was signing up for when I started dating you. I'm not gonna let anonymous internet comments scare me away." There was a long pause, and then Richard's voice came through, rough with emotion. "I don't deserve you. You deserve to be happy," Maya corrected gently. "We both do. And I'm not going anywhere." The next challenge came from an unexpected quarter. Maya had to present her research project to her graduate cohort, and one of her classmates, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer, cornered her afterward. "So you're dating Richard Whitmore," she said without preamble. "The Richard Whitmore who's funding a major healthcare foundation. The same foundation you're consulting for. Don't you think that's a conflict of interest?" The accusation hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on her feelings for Richard, on the genuine connection between them, that she hadn't considered how others might perceive the situation. "I'm not consulting for the foundation because I'm dating Richard," she said, keeping her voice level. "I was involved with the foundation months before we became romantically involved. My work with them is based on my knowledge and experience, not our personal relationship." "Is it though?" Jennifer pressed. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you saved a billionaire's mother and parlayed that into a full scholarship, a foundation position, and a wealthy boyfriend. I'm not saying you didn't earn some of it, but you have to admit the optics are questionable." Maya felt anger rise in her chest, hot and fierce. "The optics are only questionable if you assume I'm incapable of being valued for my actual skill. I saved Eleanor Whitmore's life because it was the right thing to do, not because I was angling for personal gain. Everything that's happened since then has been earned through my work, my dedication, and yes, my relationship with Richard is real and based on genuine feeling, not calculation." Jennifer held up her hands. "I'm not attacking you. I'm just saying that other people might question. You might want to think about how you're positioning yourself professionally." After Jennifer walked away, Maya stood in the hallway feeling shaken. Was everyone going to question her credentials now? Would every achievement be attributed to her relationship with Richard rather than her own merit? She called Richard that evening and told him about the encounter, expecting him to be angry on her behalf. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment. "She has a point," he said finally. "Not about your abilities or your integrity, those are beyond question, but about the optics. I've put you in a difficult position, Maya. People will always wonder whether you earned your place or whether I gave it to you. So what are we supposed to do?" Maya asked, feeling frustrated, tears prick at her eyes. "Break up? Pretend we don't have feelings for each other?" "No," Richard said firmly. "But maybe we need to be more strategic about how we handle things professionally. What if you stepped back from the foundation, at least temporarily, focused on your studies and let the work speak for itself? When you graduate and establish your own career credentials, you can rejoin if you want. That way no one can say your position is based on nepotism." The suggestion made sense logically, but it still hurt. Maya had poured her heart into the foundation, had helped shape its mission and programs. Stepping away felt like admitting defeat, like letting other people's prejudices dictate her choices. But she also understood Richard's point. If she wanted to build a legitimate career in healthcare advocacy, she needed to establish herself independently. "You're right," she said finally. "I'll resign from the advisory board, but I'm finishing the research project I started. That work is important, and I'm not abandoning it halfway through." "Fair enough," Richard agreed. "And Maya, this doesn't change anything between us. You know that, right?" "I know," she said, though part of her wondered if that was true. Their personal relationship was now affecting her professional life, forcing her to make choices she wouldn't have had to make otherwise. It was exactly the kind of complication she'd known was coming, but experiencing it was harder than she'd anticipated. The public acknowledgement that Maya had been both dreading and anticipating came in early spring. The Eleanor Whitmore Center for Cognitive Health and Stroke Prevention was officially launching with a gala event at one of the city's finest hotels. It was a major affair with influential donors, medical professionals, politicians, and media in attendance. Maya had initially planned to skip it, to let Richard and Eleanor have their moment without her presence complicating the narrative, but Eleanor had insisted, calling Maya personally to tell her that she wouldn't attend if Maya didn't. "You are part of this story," Eleanor had said firmly. "You're the reason any of this exists. I won't have you hiding in the shadows because you're afraid of what people will think." So Maya found herself in a borrowed designer gown, courtesy of Eleanor, who had sent her personal shopper to Maya's apartment with a selection of options. standing in a glittering ballroom filled with people who existed in stratospheres far above her own. Richard was at her side, his hand resting lightly on her lower back, his presence both comforting and anxiety-inducing. She saw people staring, whispering, undoubtedly wondering who she was and why she was there. The program began with speeches from various medical experts, research presentations, and testimonials from families who had been affected by stroke. Then Eleanor took the stage, moving slowly but steadily with her cane, her posture regal despite her physical limitations. She looked beautiful in a deep blue gown that complemented her eyes, and when she reached the microphone, the room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Eleanor began, her voice clear and strong. "This foundation exists because of a crisis that could have ended very differently. 7 months ago, I had a stroke. I was confused, frightened, and alone in a restaurant where I'd gone thinking I was meeting my son for dinner." The simple narrative of Eleanor's story held the room captive. She described her confusion, her terror, the way the world had suddenly stopped making sense. "And then," she said, her voice softening, "a young waitress noticed that something was wrong." Maya felt her cheeks flush as Eleanor continued. "Her name is Maya Chun, and she's here tonight. She could have simply helped me to a cab. She could have assumed I was just an elderly woman having a bad evening. Instead, she saw me, truly saw me, and recognized that I was in medical crisis. She called 911. She held my hand. She refused to let me be lost." Eleanor's eyes found Maya in the crowd. "Because of her quick thinking and compassionate action, I received critical medical treatment within the narrow window that meant the difference between recovery and catastrophic permanent damage. The doctors told my son that Maya Chun saved my life, and she did. In every sense that mattered." The room erupted in applause, and Maya felt tears streaming down her face as hundreds of strangers looked at her with something that might have been respect or admiration. Richard squeezed her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Eleanor wasn't finished. "But Maya gave me more than just medical intervention," she continued, her voice ringing through the ballroom. "She gave my son and me a reminder of something we'd both forgotten in our carefully controlled, privileged lives. She reminded us that compassion isn't about grand gestures or large donations. It's about seeing another human being in distress and choosing to act. It's about holding the hand of a stranger and refusing to let them face their fear alone." Maya Chun could have walked away that night. It would have been easier, safer, less complicated, but she didn't. And in saving my life, she changed the trajectory of my family's future in ways I'm only beginning to understand. Eleanor paused, looking directly at Maya. "The foundation we're launching tonight bears my name, but it carries her spirit. Every program we develop, every family we help, every life we save will be a reflection of the compassion and courage Maya demonstrated on a busy Thursday evening in a restaurant where she was simply trying to do her job. She is the heart of this foundation, and I am proud to call her my friend." The applause was thunderous now, and Maya felt overwhelmed by the weight of Eleanor's words, by the public acknowledgement of something she'd done without expecting anything in return. People approached her throughout the evening, donors and doctors and foundation staff, all wanting to meet the woman Eleanor had spoken about with such reverence. Some told her their own stories of strokes and cognitive decline, of loved ones lost or saved, of the terror and helplessness that came with watching someone you love slip away. A prominent cardiologist shook her hand and said, "What you did represents the best of what healthcare should be. Not just protocols and procedures, but human connection. Thank you for reminding us what matters." A woman whose husband had survived a stroke 6 years earlier hugged Maya tightly and whispered, "You gave that family their mother back. That's a gift beyond measure." By the time the gala ended, Maya was emotionally exhausted but also profoundly moved. She'd spent months wondering if she'd made too much of what happened that night, if she'd simply done what anyone would have done. But the evening had shown her that what seemed obvious to her, the instinct to help someone in distress, wasn't universal at all. It was special, valuable, worth celebrating. Richard drove her home himself that night, having dismissed his driver. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights streaming past the windows. Finally, Richard said quietly, "My mother was right about everything she said tonight. You changed our lives, Maya. Not just by calling 911, but by being who you are. You've made me a better man, a more complete man." Maya turned to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his profile, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel. "You were always a good man, Richard. You just needed permission to show it." He pulled the car over to the side of the road, parking in front of a small neighborhood park that was empty at this late hour. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I love you," he said simply. "I've been trying to find the right moment to tell you, some romantic setting or perfect occasion. But the truth is, there's no right moment because I love you all the time, in every moment. When you're arguing with me about foundation policy, when you're studying at my kitchen table with your hair in a messy bun and your glasses sliding down your nose, when you're making my mother laugh with stories about your terrible cooking attempts. I love you, Maya Chun, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." Maya felt her heart expand until it seemed too large for her chest. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I've loved you for months, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid it was too soon or too intense, or that you'd think I was caught up in the fantasy of your world rather than the reality of who you are, but I'm not. I see see you, Richard. All of you, and I love every part of what I see. He kissed her then, and it was different from their other kisses. It carried the weight of commitment, of a future being built one moment at a time, of two people choosing each other despite all the logical reasons they shouldn't work. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Richard rested his forehead against hers. "Move in with me," he said. "Not to my penthouse, that place is sterile and cold, but my mother's house has a carriage house in the back garden that's been empty for years. Let me renovate it for you. Give you a space that's yours, close to her so you can visit Isley, close to me so I can see you every day. You can have your independence and your privacy, but we can also be together." Maya pulled back slightly, searching his face. "That's a big step, Richard. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been together a few months, but when you know something is right, why wait? I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet anyway. I'm just asking you to let me be part of your daily life in a more meaningful way." Maya thought about her tiny studio apartment with its creaky radiator and temperamental plumbing. She thought about the carriage house she'd glimpsed behind Eleanor's brownstone, a charming structure with arched windows and a small terrace overlooking the garden. She thought about being able to see Eleanor more easily, about having a real workspace for her studies, about falling asleep each night knowing Rich close by. "Yes," she said, and watched joy transform his face. "Yes, I'll move into the carriage house, but I'm paying rent. I won't have people saying you're keeping me. We'll figure out the details," Richard said, pulling her close. "Right now, I just want to hold you and think about how lucky I am that you walked into my mother's life on a random Thursday evening." They sat in the car for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about the future they were building together. Richard told her about his plans for the foundation's expansion, about research initiatives he wanted to fund, about his dream of making cognitive health and stroke prevention a national priority. Maya shared her vision for her graduate thesis, a comprehensive study of family advocacy models in healthcare systems, and how she wanted to develop training programs for healthcare workers to recognize and respond to early warning signs of medical crises. The next few months were a whirlwind of change. True to his word, Richard had the carriage house renovated, and Maya was involved in every decision from the paint colors to the furniture selection. The result was a space that felt completely hers, a perfect blend of comfort and functionality with a large desk for studying, built-in bookshelves for her growing collection of medical and social work texts, and a cozy living area with a fireplace and comfortable chairs. Eleanor was thrilled to have Maya so close, and they fell into an easy routine of morning tea in the garden when weather permitted. Eleanor sharing stories from her past while Maya talked about her classes and her research. Their friendship had deepened into something that felt almost like family, and Maya found herself turning to Eleanor for advice not just about Richard but about life in general. Maya's graduate studies were going exceptionally well. Her professors praised her work, particularly her thesis research, which was drawing on her experiences with the foundation to develop practical frameworks for patient advocacy. Several of her papers had been accepted for publication in healthcare journals, establishing her credibility in the field independent of her connection to Richard or the foundation. The relationship with Richard continued to deepen and evolve. They had their first major argument about something trivial, a disagreement over where to spend Thanksgiving that escalated into a broader conversation about family obligations and compromise. They worked through it, learning how to communicate when emotions ran high, how to respect each other's perspectives even when they disagreed. The argument and the resolution that followed made their relationship stronger, more real, grounded in the messy reality of two imperfect people choosing to build something together. One evening in late fall, nearly a year after that fateful Thursday at the Belmont, Maya was studying in the carriage house when Richard knocked on her door. He looked different somehow, nervous in a way she'd never seen him. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course," Maya said, setting aside her books. "Everything okay?" Richard stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Everything is more than okay," he said, "but I need to talk to you about something important." He took her hands and led her to the couch, and they sat facing each other. "Maya, this past year has been the happiest of my life. You've transformed everything, shown me what it means to truly connect with another person, to build a life based on love and respect, rather than achievement and acquisition." "I feel the same way," Maya said, wondering where this was going. Richard took a deep breath. "I know we said we weren't rushing things. I know we agreed to take our time and let the relationship develop naturally. But I can't wait anymore." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, and Maya's heart stopped. "Maya-chan, will you marry me? Not because it makes logical sense or because it fits some timeline, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a family with you, support your dreams, share your burdens. I want everything, Maya. Will you marry me?" Maya stared at the velvet box, her mind spinning. A year ago, she'd been a waitress struggling to pay rent, her biggest dream simply finishing graduate school someday. Now she was sitting in a beautiful carriage house, being proposed to by a man she loved deeply, a man who had shown her that fairy tales could exist in the real world if you were brave enough to reach for them. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, with more conviction. Yes, Richard, yes, I'll marry you. He opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, an emerald-cut diamond set in platinum with smaller diamonds flanking it. It was elegant and timeless, exactly what Maya would have chosen if she'd been asked. Richard slipped it onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, and then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart pounding against her chest. I was terrified you'd say no, he admitted, his voice muffled against her hair. Terrified that it was too soon, that I was asking too much. How could I say no to you? Maya asked, pulling back to look at him. You're my best friend, my partner, the person who makes me want to be better, braver, more fully myself. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. They stayed wrapped in each other's arms for a long time, letting the magnitude of the moment sink in. Getting married. They were choosing to build a life together, to face whatever came next as partners. It was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely right. Your mother's going to be thrilled, Maya said eventually, a laugh bubbling up through her tears. She already knows, Richard admitted sheepishly. I asked her permission first. She cried and told me I was the smartest man alive for recognizing what a treasure you are. The wedding, when it happened 6 months later, was a small, intimate affair held in Eleanor's garden on a perfect spring afternoon. Maya wore a simple ivory dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Eleanor, her recovery now nearly complete, walked Maya down the aisle, her cane left behind for this one special occasion. She looked radiant in a soft rose-colored dress, her eyes bright with happy tears. The ceremony was officiated by a judge who was a friend of Richard's, and the only guests were a handful of close friends and foundation staff. Chloe from the Belmont was there, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue and whispering to anyone who would listen about how she'd known. There was something special about Maya from the start. Marcus Belmont attended as well, proud and paternal, having given Maya a generous wedding gift and a standing invitation to visit the restaurant anytime she wanted. When Richard and Maya exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges life brought, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. And when they kissed as husband and wife, Eleanor applauded so enthusiastically that everyone else joined in, the sound of celebration rising into the spring air. The reception was held in Eleanor's home, the rooms filled with flowers and laughter and the kind of joy that comes from witnessing two people find each other against all odds. Maya danced with Richard to a song they'd chosen together, and then she danced with Eleanor, who moved carefully but gracefully, her face alight with happiness. This is what I wanted for him, Eleanor whispered to Maya as they swayed together. Someone who sees his heart, someone who makes him laugh. Thank you for loving my son. Thank you for raising him to be someone worth loving, Maya replied. And thank you for trusting me that night, for holding my hand when you were so frightened. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You held mine first, dear girl. You always did. Maya graduated from Columbia with her master's degree that same spring, her thesis earning praise from her professors and generating interest from several healthcare organizations. She was offered positions at hospitals and advocacy groups, but she chose instead to launch her own consulting practice, working with healthcare systems to develop better protocols for recognizing and responding to medical emergencies, particularly for elderly patients. Her work was informed by both her academic training and her lived experience, and it quickly gained recognition in the field. The Eleanor Whitmore Center for Cognitive Health and Stroke Prevention continued to grow and expand, funding groundbreaking research and providing support services to thousands of families. Maya remained involved as an advisor, but she'd established her own professional identity first, ensuring that no one could question whether she'd earned her place in the healthcare advocacy world. 2 years after their wedding, Maya and Richard welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Rose Eleanor, honoring both Maya's grandmother and Richard's mother. Eleanor held her namesake for the first time with tears streaming down her face, marveling at the miracle of new life and the unexpected paths that had led to this moment. The baby has your eyes, Eleanor told Maya. Dark and wise. She's going to be extraordinary. She already is, Maya said, watching Richard cradle their daughter with a tenderness that made her fall in love with him all over again. Life settled into a new rhythm, one defined by the beautiful chaos of early parenthood, demanding careers, and the continued deepening of the bonds they'd formed. Maya and Richard bought a home of their own, a brownstone not far from Eleanor's, and they hosted regular Sunday dinners where Eleanor would tell Rose stories about her grandmother Rose, creating a bridge between generations. On the 5-year anniversary of the night Maya had saved Eleanor's life, the foundation held a special celebration. Maya stood before a room full of people whose lives had been touched by the center's work: survivors of strokes, families who had learned to recognize warning signs, healthcare workers who had received training in compassionate emergency response. She held Rose on her hip, the little girl playing with the pearls around Maya's neck, and thought about how impossibly far she'd come from that Thursday evening at the Belmont. 5 years ago, Maya began, her voice steady and clear. I was working a regular shift at a restaurant, just trying to get through the evening. An elderly woman came in, confused and frightened, and I made a choice to help her. It was a simple choice, really. I saw someone who needed help, and I acted. I had no idea that choice would change my entire life. She looked at Eleanor, seated in the front row next to Richard, her face glowing with pride. That woman became my friend, my mentor, my family. Her son became my husband, the father of my child, my partner in every sense of the word, and together we created something that has helped thousands of people, prevented countless tragedies, given families the gift of more time with the people they love. Maya paused, gathering her thoughts. The lesson I've learned is this: we never know which moments will matter. We never know when a simple act of kindness will ripple outward and change not just one life, but hundreds, thousands of lives. Every day we make choices. We can look away when we see someone struggling, or we can reach out. We can protect ourselves from complication and risk, or we can be brave enough to act when action is needed. She looked around the room, making eye contact with people who had been saved by early intervention, by someone noticing and caring enough to call for help. I'm not special. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who paid attention, who saw another human being in distress and refused to walk away. And my life is infinitely richer because of that choice. So my challenge to all of you is simple. Pay attention to the people around you. See them. Really see them. And when you witness someone who needs help, be brave enough to act. You never know whose mother you might save. You never know what beautiful story you might begin. The room erupted in applause, and Rose clapped her tiny hands together, delighted by the sound. Richard came forward and wrapped his arms around both of them, pressing a kiss to Maya's temple. I'm so proud of you, he whispered. That evening, after the celebration had ended and Rose was tucked into bed, Maya and Richard sat in their garden, the same spot where they'd had their first real conversation about the future. The city hummed around them, full of life and possibility, full of people moving through their own stories, making choices that would ripple forward in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't called 911 that night? Richard asked quietly. If you'd made a different choice? Maya leaned her head against his shoulder. All the time. But I also know that I couldn't have made a different choice. It wasn't in me to walk away from someone who needed help. My grandmother raised me to see people, to care about them, to act with compassion. That night at the Belmont, I was just being who I was raised to be, and thank God for that, Richard said. Thank God for your grandmother, for your compassion, for the person you are. You saved my mother's life, Maya, but you also saved mine in a different way. You showed me what it means to live fully, to love deeply, to be present for the people who matter. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the city, someone was making a choice that would change everything. Someone was noticing a stranger in distress. Someone was being brave enough to act, and the ripples from those moments would spread outward, touching lives in ways that couldn't be predicted or measured, creating new stories, new connections, new possibilities. Maya thought about the terrified eyes of an elderly woman in a restaurant, the desperate plea for help that had been written in that gaze. She thought about the decision she'd made in that moment, the phone call that had seemed so simple and yet had contained entire universes of consequence. She thought about Eleanor, recovered and vibrant, holding her granddaughter. She thought about Richard, the love of her life, the man she'd found through an act of simple human kindness. She thought about Rose, sleeping peacefully upstairs, the daughter who existed because Maya had chosen to see and to act. A single sentence, a single moment, a single choice. That's all it had taken to unlock a future more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. And somewhere out there, in restaurants and hospitals and streets and homes, other moments were waiting to unfold. Other lives were waiting to be changed. Other stories were waiting to begin. All starting with someone brave enough to notice, to care, to act. Maya squeezed Richard's hand, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought her here, for the love they'd built, for the life they shared. The waitress who had seen terrified eyes and called 911 immediately had become so much more. But at her core, she was still the same person, still someone who believed that every life mattered, that every moment of connection was precious, that compassion was the most powerful force in the world, and she was right.